My name is Lisa, a 35-year-old part-time worker, living with my husband Mark and our daughter Emma. Mark works in an office and Emma is in first grade. We purchased an old single-family home and are still paying off the mortgage together. When Emma started elementary school, I began working part-time. Mark is the eldest son, but his younger sister Nancy married before us and settled somewhat comfortably in their parents' house, living with their father. My father-in-law seemed open to anyone taking over the house, except Nancy, who claimed it as hers, stating, "I'll take care of Dad, so I'll take the house." When Nancy got married and moved into her parents' house, her mother had already passed away, leaving her father in good health, so she didn't have to care for him. The house was large, and I remember being surprised when I first visited it before getting married. It had a splendid gate and an expansive plot of land, which made me ask Mark, "Could it be that your parents are wealthy?" During our dating days, Mark never gave the impression of being wealthy, but the grandeur of his parents' house was quite a shock. Mark denied it, but the interior of the house was equally impressive, surprising me even more. According to Mark, his grandfather had been wealthy. The family faced financial difficulties during his father's generation. He chuckled, explaining that while the house left by his grandfather was large, it was old and uncomfortable to live in. Mark assured me when we got married that since Nancy would take care of their father, I would never have to worry about it. Our plan was to let Nancy inherit the house for taking care of him, so we bought our current house. Even from my father-in-law's perspective, he seemed more comfortable being looked after by his daughter than his daughter-in-law should he become bedridden and need care in the future. However, during visits for Christmas or summer holidays, Nancy often mistreated her father. She treated him as an outcast during meals, and if Mark or I tried to join them, she would angrily assert, "Dad likes to eat alone. Don't you fear." After meals, when I went to my father-in-law's room to talk, he expressed his dissatisfaction with Nancy. "I don't want to live in this house because Nancy gets in the way," he confided. According to him, he always eats separately from Nancy's family and receives fewer side dishes, despite Nancy receiving a decent amount of money for living expenses from his pension. Nancy had promised to take care of her father but doesn't do his laundry or much housework in general. My father-in-law ends up doing most of the cleaning inside the house and takes care of all the gardening himself. Even Nancy's husband and children, who live with them, don't treat my father-in-law with respect. When he once asked Nancy's husband for a ride to the horse race track on his day off, since my father-in-law doesn't drive, he was dismissed rudely. "I'm not your chauffeur. If you want to go to the races, use a taxi. If you have money to waste on horse racing, contribute it to living expenses," Nancy's husband retorted dismissively. My father-in-law tried to brush it off as a light-hearted comment, but he was strongly reprimanded. Nancy's 10-year-old son also behaves disrespectfully, teasing my father-in-law with cheeky remarks like, "Grandpa, stay away, you smell. Don't leave your room," despite it having lived together since birth. It seems my father-in-law has no memory of ever holding him. In contrast, when my daughter visits, he dotes on her, hinting at his loneliness. Hearing such melancholic words, I started feeling sorry for my father-in-law. Every time we visit their house, my husband gets upset, urging Nancy to treat their father better. In response, my sister-in-law angrily retorts at my husband, "I am treating Dad just fine. Are you trying to steal this house from me? I won't let this house go to anyone," my sister-in-law declared defiantly. My husband remarked to me later, "It's scary how obsessed my sister-in-law is with the house." Then, my father-in-law had a fall at home. The house, not equipped for the elderly, caused him to trip over a small step, fracturing his right hand in the process. Thankfully, he sustained no other injuries and didn't require hospitalization. However, the fracture severely limited his ability to use his dominant hand, making everyday tasks challenging. When we visited him, we were shocked to see how frail he had become. Not only could he not use his right hand, but moving around was also difficult. It was evident he needed care. However, my sister-in-law's family completely ignored him and didn't take care of him. While he could manage to get to the bathroom on his own, eating was a struggle. My husband confronted my sister-in-law immediately. "Why don't you look after Dad?" he demanded. But my sister-in-law seemed indifferent. "A broken hand is no big deal. Stop making a fuss. He can walk by himself, and he isn't complaining." She shrugged off the concerns. My father-in-law, accustomed to being neglected, seemed unable to stand up for himself against my sister-in-law. She knew it and took advantage of it. My husband was furious. Isn't it obvious? We should take care of our parents, he argued passionately. Mockingly, my sister-in-law smirked at my husband and said, "The same goes for you, right, Mark? You look after Dad. I don't need an old man with barely any money," she sneered callously. I was enraged by how callous my sister-in-law could be towards her own father. Unable to contain myself, I spoke up. "Fine. We will take care of him. If he stays here, he won't heal properly." My husband seemed to agree. We decided to take my father-in-law and move him out of his house immediately. As we packed up his belongings, my sister-in-law started making demands. "Just because you're taking care of Dad doesn't mean you get the house." It became clear that my sister-in-law cared more about the house than her father. My husband responded dismissively, "Don't worry, I already bought a house. I don't need this one. Do whatever you want with it," my husband declared. My sister-in-law seemed relieved to hear his words. As we prepared for my father-in-law's move, neither she nor her husband offered any help. Instead, they keenly searched through his belongings, hoping to find valuable items they could convert into cash. It was clear they had been benefiting from his pension, and with him gone, that would soon end. However, they found no treasures to exploit. When my father-in-law left his house, neither my sister-in-law nor her family bothered to see him off. Their coldness was striking. Upon arriving at our house, my father-in-law seemed to brighten up. He happily played with my daughter, appearing completely different from his time at his own home. We gave him a room that wasn't being used, but since the move was sudden, we hadn't made any preparations. If we had known earlier, we could have renovated, installed handrails, and removed any steps. I apologized to my father-in-law. "Sorry, I wasn't quite prepared. I'll install the handrails and make other adjustments soon." To my surprise, my father-in-law seemed equally apologetic. "My apologies too for making you worry," he said. "I wonder if $200 million will be enough to cover my care and look after my horses." I couldn't help but laugh. Is my father-in-law making jokes like this now? I wondered, noticing his newfound cheerfulness since moving into our home. "Horses, you say?" I chuckled, finding it hard to take seriously such a far-fetched idea of horses and $200 million. Playing along with his jest, I replied, "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but taking care of you will definitely cost more." His mention of horses puzzled me, seeming typical of someone wealthy. But when I saw his worried expression at my response, I realized he wasn't joking. Does taking care of a person really cost that much? "All I have left is $200 million, he said seriously. In a panic, I reassured him. My earlier comment was just a joke. $200 million is plenty, more than enough, in fact. I immediately sought my husband for clarification on the horse business and the $200 million. He too was puzzled but recalled his grandfather mentioning wealth from land ownership. "Do you remember my granddad being a wealthy man?" he asked me. "Maybe Dad owned horses," he mused. Together, we approached my father-in-law for the full story. It turned out he had owned horses for years, making frequent trips to the racetrack not to bet but to check on his own horses. He had kept this part of his life secret from his family, so my husband and his sister had no idea. With his broken hand, my father-in-law was now seriously considering his future. He feared that revealing his horse ownership and $200 million in assets to his daughter and son-in-law might lead them to demand it. Perhaps my mention of home modifications had sparked this concern, prompting him to confide in me about his situation. Understanding his worries, my husband cheerfully reassured his father, easing his concerns about the future. "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but if you've got $200 million, you should be okay. We'll figure out your caregiving expenses, so just leave it to us," my husband reassured my father-in-law confidently. After confirming with the person who had always looked after the horses that there would be no issues, we put the horse issue to rest. Now knowing that my father-in-law was quite wealthy, I began to see him in a slightly different light. I couldn't help but imagine his daughter's regret for kicking him out despite his considerable assets. The thought brought a sense of satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in with us, our lives had changed. Balancing my part-time job and caring for him was hectic, but my husband pitched in, and we managed. With him at home, my daughter found a new conversation partner, and he seemed happier. His walking had improved since moving in, and even before we finished the home modifications, he could walk slowly with the help of a cane. Although his broken hand hadn't healed yet, he was practicing eating with his left hand. Back at his previous home, his nephew would complain whenever he left his room, and he hadn't been very active. Whenever he tried to go to the racetrack, his son-in-law would show annoyance. This lack of activity might have led to his muscles weakening, contributing to his fall. On sunny days, he could now go for walks with the help of my daughter. I had been so focused on my father-in-law's recovery that I had completely forgotten about my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after he moved in with us, my sister-in-law called in a panic. "Is Dad there? If he's there, get him on the phone immediately." At that moment, my father-in-law was out for a walk with my husband and daughter. When I informed her of this, she grew even angrier. "You knew, didn't you? You knew that house was rented. That's why you took Dad to cause problems for us." I couldn't grasp what my sister-in-law meant. She seemed to be suggesting that their house was rented, but she had always boasted that it was theirs, even if the property was still in my father-in-law's name. Calling it a rented house didn't add up. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law grew increasingly heated. "Some guy claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up," she continued angrily, saying I'm behind on rent and that I need to either pay up or get out. Confusion swirled in my head. When she mentioned the landlord of their home, I wondered if my father-in-law had gone to collect rent from my sister-in-law. Just then, my father-in-law returned. I quickly explained the situation and handed him the phone to answer my sister-in-law directly. With a hint of anger in his voice, my father-in-law addressed the daughter who had driven him out of his own home. "Weren't you informed that the house was rented? That house belongs to the company where my father was the CEO. I had been paying the rent until you kicked me out," he explained calmly, yet with a hint of detachment. My sister-in-law, sensing his anger, shouted back through the phone, "I haven't heard anything about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me," my sister-in-law declared over the phone. About 30 minutes later, she and her husband arrived, their faces flushed red with surprise at seeing my father-in-law walking on his own. However, there were more pressing issues at hand as my sister-in-law erupted once more. "I thought the house and land belonged to you, Dad. Did you deceive me?" she accused. Grinning at her, my father-in-law calmly responded, "I didn't deceive you. I just kept silent because of how harshly you've been treating me." His comment left my sister-in-law speechless, prompting her husband to intervene. "Setting that aside, can you please hand over the rent? If you don't, we'll be kicked out of the house," he pleaded desperately. "Why should I pay rent for a house where I'm not living after you guys kicked me out? Don't you think that's a bit too much to ask?" My father-in-law countered, laughing off the request. Unable to argue with his reasonable statement, my brother-in-law fell silent. It was then my sister-in-law spoke up again. "Dad, were you planning to deceive us from the beginning, pretending to be injured? You seem far more energetic than when you were living with us," she accused. Stepping in to clarify, I interjected, "That's because he's been doing daily rehab exercises, practicing walking and training to eat with his injured hand." Adding to my explanation, my father-in-law nodded sagely. "I think being kicked out by you guys was a blessing. Ever since I came to live with Mark, we all eat together, and I'm never treated like a nuisance." My sister-in-law and her husband fell silent, jaws clenched, upon hearing this. Just then, my daughter innocently chimed in, "Grandpa, your horse is going to race in the next horse race, right?" Grinning warmly, my father-in-law replied, "It'll be in this Sunday's race. Why don't we go watch it together?" Excitedly, my daughter ran off, but my sister-in-law and her husband seemed to grasp the implications. Hastily, they asked my father-in-law, "Dad, do you own a horse? Are you a horse owner?" With a smug look on his face, my father-in-law finally admitted, "I kept silent because I figured if I told you about money, you'd just take it. Talking about horse racing always gets your husband frowning." My father-in-law's previously jovial face turned stern. His intimidating expression sent chills down my spine, and as he slowly began to speak, the tension in the room grew palpable. I no longer consider someone who disrespects her own father as my daughter. "I knew you moved in with me for the inheritance." My father-in-law's stern tone caught my sister-in-law off guard, leaving her visibly stunned. Adding the final blow, he declared, "You won't get a single cent of my inheritance." These words seemed to knock the wind out of my sister-in-law. Her husband, who had been supporting her staunchly, suddenly looked defeated. They both slumped their shoulders and left. The rent for my father-in-law's house was a hefty sum, far beyond what my sister-in-law and her husband could afford. Inevitably, they had to move out. I had no idea that my parents-in-law's house was rented, and neither did my husband. He later confirmed it with his father. After moving out, my sister-in-law, who had been careless with money, suddenly found herself in a financial crisis. Their habit of splurging continued, and they started relying heavily on credit cards, which only led to mounting debt. I heard they moved in with her husband's parents, but I don't know much about what happened after that. On the other hand, things have been smooth for us since we started living with my father-in-law. His broken hand healed well, and his legs and hips grew stronger to the point where he could manage everything on his own. He's now so energetic that he even goes jogging with my daughter. He's like a different person from when we first moved in. Since this incident, my father-in-law has been discussing various things with my husband and has started planning for the future, including drafting a will. I'm not sure what's in the will, but I assume he's arranged things so that his daughter won't inherit anything. What made me happiest was when my father-in-law paid off the remaining balance of our home loan. We still had nearly 20 years of payments left, but I'm grateful that he paid it off ahead of schedule. With the loan fully paid, my father-in-law is now considering renovations to make our home more accessible. He talks about his plans with a smile, but I don't want him to talk about becoming bedridden anytime soon. I want him to stay healthy for as long as possible. Enough of this racket. Get out of here with that baby right now. My husband's angry shout pierced the silence of the night, driving us out into the chill of the changing season. With mornings growing colder and the threat of imminent rain, I felt the sting of desperation claw at my bones. I'm freezing. If we stay out here, we'll freeze to death, I muttered to myself, clutching our 3-month-old daughter tightly wrapped in her blanket. Despite my relentless knocking, there was no response from inside. Helpless, I hugged my crying child closer, and we stumbled on. Each step felt heavier as exhaustion settled in. Please let us in, I pleaded with the empty darkness, but the night offered no solace. Wandering aimlessly, I found myself sitting on a bench in the park, my body frozen to the core. Tears flowed freely as the events leading to our plight played out in my mind. How did we end up like this? My name is Olivia, 31 years old. Left orphaned by my parents' divorce in middle school, I was later devastated by my mother's tragic accident 2 years ago. Alone and desperate, Benjamin, a college classmate turned husband, became my anchor. His promises of support and love offered a glimmer of hope in my darkest days. But since learning about my pregnancy, Benjamin's demeanor shifted. His warmth turned to frost, his kindness replaced by indifference. Despite my morning sickness and struggles, his patience wore thin, leaving me to fend for myself. I hoped our daughter's birth would mend our fractured bond, but it only widened the chasm between us. His absence grew pronounced, his anger palpable. Every night echoed with his complaints, his resentment towards our crying baby tearing at my heart. This life, once filled with dreams of a happy family, now felt like a nightmare of loneliness and despair. My husband seemed to have an invisible shield against childcare responsibilities, always deflecting them with claims of being swamped with work. Even on his supposed days off, relaxation at home was a foreign concept to him, opting instead to gallivant around town from dawn till dusk. Left alone to tend to our baby, I found myself drained, both physically and emotionally. Each night, our daughter's cries intensified, mirroring my own mounting distress. One fateful evening, my husband's simmering frustration boiled over. "Get out of this house with that baby right now." His words cut through the air like a blade, leaving me stunned. I can't do that," I stammered, but before I could plead my case, we were cast out into the biting cold, devoid of essentials like keys, wallet, or phone. Helplessness washed over me as I clung to my daughter, wrapping her tightly in a blanket to shield her from the chill. With weary steps, we trudged on until exhaustion forced me to collapse on a park bench, my mind a whirlwind of despair. How had our once promising life devolved into this chaos? As if in response to my silent lament, my daughter's cries pierced the night air once more, a painful reminder of my failure. Just as the cold began to numb my senses, a voice shattered the silence. "Are you okay?" The concern in the stranger's voice momentarily transported me, as if my own mother had reached out from beyond. As I looked up, a woman stood before me, her eyes filled with compassion. "My husband kicked me out because of her baby's crying," I explained, the words heavy with shame. Without hesitation, the stranger extended a lifeline. "Come stay at my place," she offered, her kindness a beacon of hope in the darkness. As I hesitated, Unsure whether to accept her generosity, she gently took my daughter into her arms, instantly calming her restless cries. "It's okay, don't worry. Let's go somewhere warm for the baby's sake." Entering her home felt like stepping into a sanctuary. My daughter was cocooned in a soft blanket, offered a comforting glass of hot milk, and cradled in the stranger's arms, her gentle snores filling the room with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in far too long. I couldn't believe it. No matter how hard I tried, the baby just wouldn't settle. It can be quite a challenge if you're not accustomed to it. As a recent grandmother, I found myself occasionally caring for the little one, perhaps explaining my newfound sensitivity to a baby's cries. Checking on the source of the noise, I found myself face to face with a woman, gentle smile easing the tension in the room. She seemed around the same age as my mother, radiating warmth that instantly put me at ease. "I'm sorry for intruding like this," I murmured, feeling a wave of gratitude for her understanding. "It's okay," she reassured me, her kind eyes reflecting empathy. "We should help each other out in times of need. Do you need a ride home? Do you live nearby?" I hesitated, memories of being cast out still fresh in my mind. "No, I might just get thrown out again," I confessed, my voice faltering. Without missing a beat, she offered her hospitality. Her kindness moved me to tears once more. "Thank you so much," I whispered, introducing myself. "My name is Olivia." As the conversation flowed, a sudden realization dawned on me. "Wait a minute, isn't your baby's name Anne?" Her nod confirmed my suspicion. "Yes, but how did you?" It turns out, this woman was Jackson, my husband's direct superior. She had sent us a gift when Anne was born, hence her familiarity with our daughter's name. The coincidence caught me off guard, and I regretted airing my grievances about my husband to her. "We're always grateful for your help," I said, my mind racing with newfound information. "The thing is, my husband has been busy with work lately, and he seems quite tired." Jackson's response stunned me. "That can't be right. Your husband has been on parental leave for the past 2 months. My heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. "But he says he goes to work every day," I protested, confusion clouding my thoughts. "He even said he has work tomorrow." "It's a holiday. The office will be closed," Jackson explained, her tone tinged with concern. "I wonder what he's up to." I was blindsided by the revelation that my husband, whom I believed was tirelessly working, was actually on vacation. However, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. I couldn't shake off the sense of anticipation that seemed to linger on the days my husband was supposed to be at work. Ever since I became pregnant, his behavior had taken a noticeable shift, leaving me with a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. As I pondered how to investigate further, Jackson suggested a bold idea. "Why don't you check his social media?" she proposed, gesturing towards a computer in the corner of the room. I accepted her offer gratefully and began scrolling through my husband's online presence. What I discovered left me reeling in shock. A trove of photos featuring him and another woman, seemingly inseparable. They look like a couple. "That's Ava," Jackson explained, her voice tinged with sympathy. "She worked at our company for only 3 months before recently quitting." The pieces fell into place, confirming my worst fears. Though I had harbored suspicions, the reality of my husband's affair hit me harder than I had anticipated. Do you know her address, her contact information?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. But Jackson hesitated, her concern evident. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned her name. It's personal information, and I can't disclose it," she replied gently, offering me solace in my moment of vulnerability. As I deflated, Jackson extended her support. "I'll do everything I can to help with anything else," she assured me. But my attention was drawn back to the screen, where a series of photos showcased my husband and his mistress living a life of luxury, dining at the prestigious Paris hotel. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. With no income during my maternity leave and our combined savings dwindling, there was no way he could afford such extravagance. "No way. This can't be happening," I whispered, my heart heavy with disbelief. With trembling hands, I logged into my bank account online, hoping against hope for a different outcome. But what I found only confirmed my worst fears. My savings of $250,000 vanished. The inheritance I received after my mother's tragic car accident had been cut in half, leaving me stunned and motionless for what felt like an eternity. "What's wrong?" Jackson's concerned voice broke through my daze. "My husband has been using my savings without my permission," I confessed, the betrayal cutting deep. "I have reserved those funds for our daughter's future," trusting my husband to keep them safe. But as I reflected on recent events, the pieces began to fall into place. Leaving my debit card with him during my hospitalization for childbirth had been a mistake. He hadn't visited me once during that time, and the first withdrawal from my savings coincided with the day I handed him the card. I had never doubted his integrity, believing he had locked it away securely. "I can't forgive him," I murmured, the weight of his deception crushing my spirit. "He's been using my beloved mother's inheritance without my permission." Determined to expose his deceit, I accepted Jackson's offer of a digital camera. The next day, we watched from the car as my husband, wearing a self-satisfied smirk, left our house without a second thought for our daughter and me. His carefree demeanor grated against my raw emotions, fueling my resolve. As expected, his car eventually pulled up at the Paris hotel, his mistress in tow. With practiced ease, they strolled into the restaurant, oblivious to the pain they caused. Entrusting our daughter to Jackson's care, I took a seat behind them, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "I've had enough of Olivia's stubbornness," my husband's callous words echoed in my ears. "Finally kicked her out last night. Now she's filed for divorce. I'll get the compensation from her mother's accident, and maybe even alimony." "You're despicable," Jackson retorted, her disgust palpable. "Your wife doesn't even realize you're after her money. You've been using her vulnerability since her mother passed away, but having a child was an unexpected obstacle." The shock of his admission left me speechless, my mind reeling with disbelief. Oblivious to my turmoil, my husband swaggered towards the elevator with his mistress, the key to their hotel room dangling from his fingers. As I stealthily followed them, even though it was just a fleeting moment before the elevator arrived, they embraced and began to kiss. Despite bracing myself, witnessing the affair unfold before my eyes was agonizing. A shiver ran down my spine as my husband's callous words echoed in my ears. "This is a pre-celebration for kicking Olivia out. Let's have a blast today." Unable to find my voice, I watched helplessly as the elevator doors closed, swallowing them up and leaving me behind. Frustration and sadness overwhelmed me, rendering me unable to stand. Collapsing to my knees, I felt a profound shift within me. The grief that had gripped my heart began to morph into a simmering desire for revenge. Betrayal of this magnitude was too cruel to ignore. I couldn't simply let it slide. That evening, timing my return to coincide with my husband's arrival home from work, I made my way back to the house. "Whoa, look who's back," he greeted me with mock surprise. "I'm sorry. I'll do whatever you say from now on. Please let me back in the house," I pleaded, masking my rising anger behind a facade of submission. It was time to tighten the noose around him, to play the part of the obedient wife and bide my time. "Fine. From now on, I'm not giving you any living expenses. Do whatever you want," he declared, his arrogance undiminished. Without a word of dissent and without broaching the subject of divorce, I made it clear that I was onto him. Despite his continued despicable attitude, I remained resolute, laying the groundwork for the vengeance that simmered beneath the surface. Enduring my husband's deceit, I persisted in my search for evidence of his affair, scouring the house for any clue. Among his belongings, I discovered a trove of receipts for hotels and meals tucked away in his suit pockets, but alone, they felt like feeble proof. It wasn't until I delved into social media under the woman's name that her true identity was unveiled 2 weeks later. With all preparations in place, I found myself once again at the infamous Paris hotel. There they were, my husband and his mistress, brazenly indulging in dinner and public displays of affection, just as they had done before. Mustering my resolve, I approached them as they prepared to board the elevator. "What are you doing here?" my husband demanded, his tone defensive. "Why are you here?" "I am obviously here for a work meeting," I countered sharply, seizing the moment to confront him. Quickly disentangling himself from his mistress, my husband looked guilt-ridden, attempting to flee. "That's odd. Today's a day off, isn't it?" I pressed, my voice cutting through the tension. Turning in surprise, he stumbled upon a revelation. "What, Jackson? You're supposed to be on parental leave, right? How come you're working?" Caught off guard by my unexpected presence with his boss, my husband's feeble excuses faltered. Meanwhile, the mistress, identified as Ava, appeared uneasy and uncertain, her gaze fixed downward. Sensing the scrutiny of onlookers, I proposed a change of scenery. "Since we're drawing attention, let's move this to the room you guys booked. Unless you want me to scatter these photos around here. Is that okay?" I brandished the damning evidence, leaving my husband reeling. In a desperate bid to escape, he grabbed my arm and pulled me into the elevator, but Jackson intercepted, apprehending the fleeing mistress and bringing her along. "Why are you with Jackson?" my husband demanded, bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. "Since the day you kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. Jackson heard our daughter crying in the park and invited me in," I explained, seizing the opportunity to expose his hypocrisy. As we entered the room, a tense silence descended, marking the beginning of a confrontation long overdue. Dumping all the evidence onto the table, I watched as shock rippled across their faces. "What are these photos?" my husband stammered, his voice betraying a hint of panic. "I was here the day after you kicked me out of the house. It was shocking, but I took these as evidence of your affair," I explained, my tone steely with resolve. "That's low. That's my line," my husband retorted, his attempt to deflect criticism falling flat in the face of my accusations. His silence spoke volumes, but I pressed on. "I'm aware you used my savings without my consent. That money was a legacy from my mother," I continued, my voice unwavering. "That's our shared property. I don't see an issue with me using it," he countered, his arrogance grating against my sense of injustice. "It's not shared property. It's mine and mine alone," I insisted, refusing to back down. "You will return the $120,000 you used." "Come on, we're married. Let's not get into such tedious matters," he dismissed, his indifference fueling my frustration. Exhausted by his callousness, I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, slamming them onto the table with finality. "I'm fed up with you. Fill out these divorce papers immediately." "That's a leap, don't you think? Didn't I hear you say you wanted me to bring up divorce?" he protested, his attempt to deflect blame falling on deaf ears. I played a recording of a conversation we had during a previous meal, his hurtful words reverberating throughout the room. "Give me a break. Not a chance to think. You approached me just for my money," his voice echoed, each syllable a painful reminder of his betrayal. "It all became clear after I heard our conversation from that day. That's why you became so cold all of a sudden," I declared, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "There's a lot to the situation. I don't want to hear any excuses or lies," I continued, my resolve unyielding. "Pay me $20,000 for the affair, $10,000 for all the times you mistreated me, $120,000 for the money you took from my savings, and $110,000 for child support until our daughter turns 20. That's a total of $260,000 in one lump sum." "What mistreatment?" he protested, his voice tinged with desperation. But there was no denying the truth of his actions. "You kicked me and our daughter out of the house in the middle of the night and didn't provide living expenses," I countered, my voice unwavering. Clearly caught off guard, he attempted to salvage the situation. "Just calm down. Let's talk this out," he pleaded, his tone bordering on pathetic. But there was no room for negotiation. "Don't mock me, and don't think you're out of this either. I'll be seeking $20,000 in damages from you too," I retorted, my gaze unwavering. Turning to face his mistress, I could see the color drain from her face. "I have to pay too, of course. But in return, I'm divorcing him, so you two can be open about your relationship. That should be a relief, right?" I remarked, my tone cutting. As the reality of his situation sank in, my husband's desperation reached a fever pitch. "Please spare me this one time. I'll be a good husband, I promise," he begged, his tears and snot a sorry sight. But his pitiful display only served to strengthen my resolve. Turning my back on him, I took the house keys and card case from his bag. I sold the house that was in my name. Jackson reported everything to the company, and it seems you're going to be fired, I informed him, my voice devoid of emotion. As we left the room, I knew it was the end of an era. I didn't want to see my husband ever again, so I arranged for a divorce through a lawyer. I reflected, my mind already moving forward. I demanded compensation for the divorce, the money he had squandered, and child support. With his parents furious and his future uncertain, my husband's downfall was complete. Since he couldn't pay all the compensation in one go, his father forced him to work in a mine, I concluded, my voice tinged with finality. Leaving behind the remnants of my old life, my daughter and I embarked on a new journey. We bought a small apartment and started our new life, I recounted, a sense of relief washing over me. The moment we started living here, my daughter's night crying stopped completely. Grateful for Jackson's support and the opportunity for a fresh start, I knew that together, my daughter and I would build a home filled with happiness and love. My in-laws were drunk. Despite the whispers from people around us, my in-laws didn't seem to care as they kept yelling at me. Well, I guess it's too late since you're already married, but if you want to be part of this family, you need to show us you have enough money, they said. Yes, your dad is right, so make sure to give us $1,000 a month as a new bonus, they'd added. I was stunned by their words. I couldn't believe they would say such things at a wedding reception. I just stared at them, my face going pale. My dad took the microphone from them. Enough is enough. Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves? He said. My name is Linda. I'm a 30-year-old office worker. I'm currently dating Larry, who is 32, 2 years older than me. I met him through a friend who was worried about me being single, so she introduced me to Larry. After dating for a year, Larry proposed, and now we are soon to be married. I lost my mother when I was very young, and my father raised me by himself. He worked very hard to take care of all my needs. I didn't have many worries growing up, but losing my mom, who I loved so much, deeply hurt me. Because I lost someone I cared about so much, I was cautious with my emotions. That's why I hadn't really dated anyone since my school days. I'd even thought it would be okay if I stayed single forever. Then I met Larry. At first, I didn't feel any romantic feelings for him, even though he asked me out many times. Larry really cared about me and was always a gentleman. Slowly, I began to open my heart to him, and we started dating. He kept caring for me, and I felt very happy. He became very special to me, and I started thinking I wanted to be with him forever. Then he proposed, and we decided to get married. Larry understood everything about me and was always kind to me no matter what. Don't worry, if you're ever feeling unsure about something, I'll be here for you until you feel better. I love you, Linda. You can count on me, he would say. His words moved me. He promised to make me happy for the rest of my life. Just being with him warmed my heart. If he cared that much for me, I thought I should do the same for him. When I told my father that we decided to get married, he was so happy that he cried. Wow, Linda, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you, he said. Oh, Dad, you're being dramatic, I joked. Wow, I hadn't heard anything like that from you until now. I was always worried that you might never get married, he replied. Oh, really? I had no idea you were worried about that, I said. Well, every father worries about his daughter, you know. Anyway, congratulations, he said. Thanks, Dad, I replied. I was so happy to be congratulated by my dad, who had raised me by himself. I thought I would probably cry at the wedding, and my dad would probably cry even more since he was already crying now. With that, Larry and I started preparing for our wedding. We were both busy with our jobs, so our days were very hectic. We worked during the weekdays and made wedding preparations over the weekends. There was no time to rest. Our calendars were always full. On the rare day off, we were supposed to visit Larry's parents' house. It was my first time meeting them. Larry had met my father right after he proposed to me. Originally, I planned to visit Larry's parents soon after, but they were busy and our schedules never lined up. Finally, we managed to arrange a visit. As we arrived, I suddenly felt nervous. Don't worry, my parents are very kind, Larry reassured me. His words made me feel a bit better, and I rang the doorbell. It was his mother who opened the door. Mom, I'm home, Larry said. Welcome home, Larry. It's so good of you to come, his mother replied warmly. As she talked with her son, I greeted her politely. Nice to meet you. My name is Linda, and I'm Larry's fiancée. I see, so you're Linda, she said, her tone shifting. She looked me up and down, her smile fading. Then she led us to the living room, where her cold attitude remained. Linda, I'm curious about what you bring to the table. Larry is our treasure and our only child. If you're going to marry him, you need to be a suitable wife. Are you worthy of him? She asked, sounding more like an interrogation. I was taken aback by her question. I hadn't expected such a cold attitude from my future mother-in-law and was at a loss for words. You're going to join our family, you know. Are you ready for that? She continued. True, marrying Larry meant joining his family, but it's not like Larry's family were the Kennedys or some well-known high society family. It's not like I was marrying into a royal family. Why was I being asked to make such a commitment? Besides, I wasn't even going to live with them. I don't like being pressured with questions like these. As I was thinking about how to respond, his mother seemed impatient with my slow reply and scolded me harshly. When I ask you a question, answer me right away. You're so rude, she snapped. I'm asking if you're ready for this, she continued, raising her voice. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I managed to say, I hope that Larry and I will support each other in our marriage. When I said that, his mother was not convinced. What a naive thing to say. You aren't just going to support each other. You were supposed to support Larry. It's your job as a wife to support your husband. You don't even understand the basics, she criticized. Then Larry's father, who was sitting next to her, intervened. Honey, calm down. Sorry about that, Linda. You must have been startled by my wife's words, he said, trying to ease the tension. It's all right, I replied, trying to remain calm. His mother is very protective of her only son. Maybe she was just nervous and spoke without thinking. Just then, Larry's brother walked in. He spoke in a quiet, calm, and gentle tone. He seemed like a kind man, which gave me a moment of relief. But that relief was short-lived. With a smile on his face, he said the most unexpected thing. What my wife says is actually justified. What concerns me the most is that you come from a single-parent family. What do you mean by that? I asked, confused. Well, being raised by just one parent doesn't have a good public image. We can't be too happy to have such a person become the wife of our only son, can we? He explained. Hold on a minute, I said, unable to let this comment slide. What is wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked very hard to raise me by himself. I am very thankful for my upbringing, and I am proud of my father. Being raised by a single parent doesn't make me any less valuable. But they still argued. Since you were missing one parent, you couldn't have learned how to be a good wife, do housework, and such. I responded, I did a lot of housework to help my father. I can also cook pretty well, so please don't say that. Despite my response, Larry's words ignored what I said, and he finally stated, I will allow you to marry Larry, but in exchange, you must promise to devote everything to us because we are Larry's parents. Can you promise me that? What? I was shocked. Wow, since you came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, you do know what your duties are, don't you? Before I could say more, he continued the conversation. I found that my in-laws had completely taken over the conversation, giving me little chance to respond. That night, as I thought more about the marriage, I decided to share my feelings with Larry. Say, Larry, do your parents always talk to people like that? What about it? Larry seemed unfazed. I was surprised that Larry didn't see anything wrong with what his parents had said to me. Well, I mean the way your parents spoke to me and what they said. Oh, really? Well, they were just talking about whether you were ready for this marriage. I get that your parents are worried about their son's marriage, but I feel like what they were saying was a bit too much. I said. Really? Why is that? My parents didn't say anything wrong. Besides, they've given us permission to get married, so don't worry about it. Larry replied. That's true, but I felt uneasy, I said. Larry seemed to side with his parents more than with me, and that was very troubling. I guess he realized I was feeling unsure because he gave me a hug. Linda, you don't have to worry so much. My parents are just a bit upset because their only son is getting married, he said. He spoke as if he didn't fully support me. It's all going to be fine. Don't overthink it. I'm sure they just want what's best for us. They want us to be as good of a couple as they are. That's why they were a bit harsh. Oh, really? I replied. Like he said, maybe his parents have high expectations for us. But even if that's the case, I don't think it's right for them to belittle me because I was raised by my father. I don't think people who say such things make a good couple. We are the ones getting married, and we should be the focus, not their approval or disapproval. With that perspective, although I was still a bit upset, I decided not to dwell too much on his parents' opinions. Then the day of the wedding arrived. We had many guests, including our relatives, friends, colleagues, and bosses. I walked down the aisle with my father, who had raised me all my life. Larry and I exchanged our vows and rings. We were met with applause, and for the first time, I truly realized that I was getting married to Larry. I felt the happiness I had never felt before. As we walked into the reception hall, we made our way through the crowd, greeted by videos of us as part of the entertainment. It was a joyful time. I chatted with friends I hadn't seen in a while, and many people congratulated us. Despite my earlier worries about his parents, I was glad I had decided to marry Larry. I was glad we decided to have a memorable day. After the ceremony, we planned to officially register our marriage, and Larry and I would become husband and wife. I cherished every moment and felt so happy. Time flew by, and soon it was time for the final part of the event. The bride and groom and both sets of parents lined up to greet the guests, but I started to feel uneasy because of Larry's parents. We were all supposed to be standing in line, but his parents were wobbly on their feet. If you looked closely, you could see that their faces were bright red. They had drunk too much. Some relatives asked if they were okay. My in-laws were clearly drunk, but we had to wrap up the ceremony and get it over with. The moderator handed the microphone to me and Larry. Suddenly, Larry's mother snatched my hand away from him and yelled at me like a professional wrestler in the middle of a challenge. "Listen to me, Linda. After this wedding, you are going to devote yourself to us completely. Prepare yourself because we are going to test you really hard," she said. The guests started whispering to each other, and some even thought it was a joke and laughed. Then Larry's father grabbed the microphone. "Linda, don't you feel embarrassed to wear a dress like that? It doesn't suit you at all, dear. You should tell her the truth," his mother chimed in. As expected, the whispers among the guests changed in tone. I looked at Larry, hoping he would stop his father's rude comments, but Larry said he couldn't do that and that his parents weren't doing anything wrong. It became clear he would never protect me from his parents in the future. That was the moment I realized it. I was certain of it, even as the hall buzzed around us. My in-laws were drunk and continued to insult me. "Well, you're already married, but if you're going to be part of this family, you need to prove that you have enough money," they said. "Yes, that's right," they continued. "After you register your marriage at the city hall, you should give us a few thousand a month and your entire bonus." I was shocked by their words. I never thought they would say such things at our wedding reception. I just stared at them, feeling my face go pale. My father took the microphone from them. "Enough of this. Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves?" he said. Though still showing some respect, his parents glared at my father. "Why are you interrupting us while we're talking?" I knew this woman's father was no good. "Single parents are never any good," they said. Why did they talk like this? How dare they insult my father, I thought. My father, keeping his cool, replied, "You people are even worse than I imagined. You even refuse to meet me because I am a single father. I never thought that someone like you would work for President Scott. President Scott is such a respectable person. I assumed his employees would be decent as well," my father continued. At that, my father-in-law's face turned very serious. How do you know President Scott?" "He's a business partner of my company and, more importantly, an old friend of mine," my father explained. "And speaking of single parents, President Scott was raised by his mother alone. So you just insulted the president of the company you work for." Seeing my in-laws' faces fall at my father's words, I realized they finally understood the mess they had gotten themselves into. "I apologize, sir. Please don't tell the president about this," my in-law pleaded, suddenly falling to his knees. Just moments before, he had acted like he was in charge, but now he looked defeated. I could hear laughter from the guests. Some even pulled out their cell phones to record the scene. "No matter how much you apologize, you can't take back your words," my dad said. He walked over to me and asked if I wanted to go home with him. I said yes and took the microphone from Larry's hand. "Thank you for the great entertainment, but there will be no marriage," I announced to Larry, his parents, and everyone who attended. "I will make sure to return the money you gave us for this occasion." Then I left the reception hall with my dad. I caught a glimpse of Larry and his parents looking dismayed, and soon after, his relatives rushed over with worried expressions on their faces. The place must have been in complete chaos. As I returned their money, I apologized to the guests. They all expressed sympathy for me and praised me and my dad for our actions, saying it was good that we weren't taken advantage of by such terrible people. Later, Larry's coworkers who had attended the reception must have spread the word about what happened at his company. Larry became known for having such unreasonable parents and was criticized for having a weak character. His embarrassment was so great that he resigned voluntarily. Of course, the president of my father-in-law's company found out about the incident. Larry's father was demoted and sent to an insignificant division of the company, transferred to a remote office in the countryside. I heard that Larry's family has been ostracized by all his relatives because of what happened at the wedding. While it's unfortunate, it really was their own doing, and sometimes things like that just can't be avoided. In the meantime, I've been using this opportunity to strengthen my relationship with my dad. We've been spending more quality time together, and it's helped me appreciate all he's done for me even more. One day, he sat me down for a serious talk. "Linda, are you interested in running the business?" he asked, looking at me with a mixture of hope and seriousness. "Do you mean?" I started, a bit unsure where he was heading with this. "Why don't you work towards becoming the president of my company?" he suggested. It was a big step, and he seemed to believe I was ready to take it on. I'll do my best, I promised him, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I decided then to focus on stepping up my game at work rather than getting entangled in romantic relationships for now. I want to prove to myself and to my dad that I could excel and perhaps one day be a great leader like him. Currently, I am deeply involved in learning everything I can at my dad's company. The work is challenging but fulfilling, and I'm determined to make the most of this opportunity. Reflecting on the wedding fiasco, it's clear that Larry's in-laws were quite unreasonable, turning what should have been a beautiful event into a spectacle. Thankfully, since the marriage wasn't officially registered, Linda, myself in this scenario, was spared from a legally binding mistake. Now, free from any marital ties and with no looming in-law issues, I can focus solely on my career aspirations. It's a relief to know that out of a chaotic situation came a clear path forward for me. I look forward to what the future holds and am excited about the potential of leading the company. I wish myself all the best and hope that anyone watching this story can take something valuable from it. Thank you for staying till the end. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this story, and I hope to see you in the next video.